Iran has made a shocking offer to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow sea lane through which 20% of the world's oil flows. But with one terrifying condition: oil cargo must be traded only in Chinese yuan. Not in dollars, not in euros, only yuan. A senior Iranian official revealed that Tehran is considering allowing some oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz only if the trade is conducted in Chinese currency. If this becomes reality, it could challenge the 52-year dominance of the U.S. petrodollar system. But the real question is not just about oil. The real question is, why is Iran doing this? How will the United States respond? And how could the entire world react if the global oil system begins to split into two currencies? To understand what is happening today, we have to go back more than 50 years. In 1974, after the oil crisis shook global markets, the United States made a historic agreement with Saudi Arabia. The deal was simple but incredibly powerful. Saudi Arabia, and eventually most of OPEC, would sell oil only in U.S. dollars. In exchange, the United States would provide military protection, security guarantees, and access to global financial markets. That agreement created the petrodollar system, and it changed the world. From that moment on, every country on earth that needed oil had to hold U.S. dollars. Japan needed dollars. Germany needed dollars. India needed dollars. China needed dollars. Even countries that hated American policies still needed dollars to buy energy. This created massive global demand for the U.S. currency. And that demand gave Washington an extraordinary power. Because when the world needs your currency, you gain enormous economic leverage. The United States could impose sanctions, freeze bank accounts, cut countries off from the financial system, pressure governments through currency markets. For decades, this system became the foundation of American global power. But over time, some countries began searching for ways to escape it, and Iran became one of the most determined challengers. Why Iran wants to break the dollar system. Iran's conflict with the United States did not start today. It has been building for more than 40 years. Since the Iranian Revolution in 1979, relations between Washington and Tehran have been hostile. Over the decades, the United States imposed layer after layer of sanctions on Iran's economy. These sanctions targeted Iranian oil exports, Iranian banks, international companies doing business with Iran. Because oil sales are Iran's main source of revenue, these sanctions were devastating. Iran suddenly faced a major problem. It could produce oil, but selling it in the global system became extremely difficult. Most international banks refused to process Iranian transactions. Most shipping companies avoided Iranian cargo. Most countries feared secondary sanctions. So Iran began looking for alternative economic systems. And one country became its most important partner: China. China is the largest energy importer in the world, and its economy needs enormous amounts of oil. Meanwhile, Iran has huge reserves of crude, but limited buyers due to sanctions. This created a natural partnership. In 2021, Iran and China signed a 25-year strategic cooperation agreement involving major investments and long-term energy deals. Under this arrangement, China would invest billions into Iran's infrastructure, energy sector, and technology. In return, Iran would provide China with discounted oil supplies. But there was another crucial aspect of this partnership. China wanted to expand the global use of its currency, the yuan. For years, Beijing has been trying to reduce global reliance on the U.S. dollar, and energy trade is the biggest battlefield in that struggle. If oil, the world's most important commodity, starts being traded in yuan, the implications could be enormous. Iran understood this perfectly. And now, with war raging in the Persian Gulf, Tehran may be trying to use its most powerful geopolitical weapon, the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most strategically important waterways on Earth. At its narrowest point, it is only about 34 kilometers wide. Yet through this tiny corridor flows about 20 million barrels of oil every day, roughly 20% of global supply. Major oil producers rely on this route: Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, UAE, Qatar, Iran. If this strait closes, the consequences are immediate. Oil prices surge, shipping costs explode, global inflation rises. And that is exactly what began happening when the current conflict erupted. After military strikes and escalating tensions, Iran effectively restricted traffic through the strait. Global oil markets panicked. Energy prices jumped above $100 per barrel. Some analysts warned prices could reach $150 or even $200 if the crisis worsens. And suddenly, the world realized something important. Despite America's massive military power, Iran still controls the geographic choke point of global oil. Iran understands that it cannot defeat the United States in a conventional war. The U.S. military budget is larger than the next several countries combined. But Iran doesn't need to win a traditional war. Instead, its strategy focuses on asymmetric power. In simple terms, Iran cannot match America's military strength, so it targets America's economic vulnerabilities. Experts say Iran's strategy aims to create global economic pressure that forces political compromise. By disrupting shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, Iran can cause massive economic shock. And by linking the reopening of the strait to yuan-based oil trade, Iran may be attempting something even bigger: a challenge to the financial architecture of global energy markets. If Iran seriously attempts to enforce yuan-based oil trade through Hormuz, Washington has several possible responses. Scenario 1, military escalation. The United States could dramatically increase its military presence in the Persian Gulf. This could include aircraft carrier strike groups, naval escorts for tankers, mine clearing operations, airstrikes on Iranian naval infrastructure. But military escalation carries serious risks. Iran has already used mines, drones, and missile attacks in the region. Even a small naval confrontation could trigger a much larger war. Scenario 2, economic counterattack. The U.S. could impose even harsher sanctions on Iran. This might include targeting Chinese companies buying Iranian oil, blocking yuan-based oil settlements, pressuring banks to reject non-dollar energy payments. However, this approach also has limits. If China openly defies U.S. sanctions, enforcing them becomes much harder. Scenario 3, diplomatic pressure. Washington could pressure Gulf allies, such as Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, to maintain oil sales in dollars. If these major producers continue pricing oil in dollars, the petrodollar system would likely remain dominant. Scenario 4, strategic energy response. The United States and its allies could release massive oil reserves to stabilize markets. In fact, global emergency reserves have already been deployed to offset supply disruptions. This strategy buys time, but it cannot permanently replace the oil flowing through Hormuz. The rest of the world is watching this crisis very carefully because the stakes are enormous. Europe. European countries are already negotiating with Iran to ensure safe passage for their ships. Europe desperately needs stable energy supplies, but it also relies heavily on the U.S. financial system. So European governments may try to avoid choosing sides. China. China is perhaps the biggest winner if yuan-based oil trade expands. China imports huge amounts of energy from the Middle East. If it can pay in its own currency instead of dollars, Beijing gains enormous financial leverage, and the yuan becomes more influential globally. Russia. Russia could quietly support this shift. Since Western sanctions already pushed Russia toward non-dollar energy trade, Moscow has a strong interest in weakening dollar dominance. BRICS countries. Countries like India, Brazil, South Africa may begin experimenting with alternative payment systems for energy. not necessarily abandoning the dollar completely, but gradually diversifying away from it. Some analysts believe the world could be moving toward a dual energy system. In this scenario, one part of the world continues trading oil in dollars. Another part increasingly trades oil in alternative currencies, like the yuan. This would create something unprecedented. Two competing financial systems for the same commodity. For example, Western markets might price oil in dollars through traditional exchanges. Meanwhile, China and its partners might develop yuan-based energy markets. The result? A fragmented global economy. But Iran's strategy also carries enormous risks. If the Strait of Hormuz remains closed too long, Iran itself suffers. Its economy depends heavily on oil exports. Blocking the strait could damage its own revenue. Some analysts warn that fully shutting the strait could even become economic suicide for Iran. So Tehran must balance pressure with survival. This may explain why it is considering limited tanker access rather than total closure. The most important question may not be about oil or shipping. It may be about the future of global power. For decades, the international system has been built around American financial dominance. But now several forces are challenging that system. China's economic rise, Russia's sanctions resistance, BRICS financial cooperation, alternative payment systems. Iran's yuan proposal could be one small piece of a much larger transformation, or it could simply be a short-term wartime tactic. Right now, nobody knows. Conclusion. One thing is certain. The Strait of Hormuz crisis has revealed something profound about global power. A narrow stretch of water, only 34 kilometers wide, can shake the entire global economy. And a single sentence, oil traded in yuan instead of dollars, could trigger debates about the future of the international financial system. But the final outcome remains uncertain. Will the United States defend the petrodollar with economic or military power? Will China quietly support the expansion of yuan-based energy trade? Or will diplomacy eventually reopen the strait and restore the old system? For now, the world is watching one of the most dangerous geopolitical chess games of our time. Because the battle unfolding in the Persian Gulf may not just be about oil. It may be about who controls the financial system of the 21st century.